Welcome to this episode of Briefs. It's Tuesday, February 4th, 2004, at 9:45 a.m. I'm 22 years old driving my Geo Metro to the Best Buy off Cedar Bluff in Knoxville, Tennessee. This is the day I've been anxiously waiting for during the past 3 months. So much so, I've taken the day off work at a local print shop so I can be the first person to walk in as the Best Buy opens for business at 10 a.m. At 9:52, I step out of the Geo Metro in the parking lot. By step out, I really mean dip my head under the doorframe and slither my long, lanky body from this miniature vehicle like a wacky waving inflatable air tube man who escaped a grand opening from a Halloween store, then stuffed himself in a toy car. But there's no one in the parking lot but me, and I don't care how ridiculous I look, because I'm on a mission. I have a goal. And I would have driven a unicycle through a parade of villagers yelling shame and throwing rotten vegetables at me to be here in this moment, the right place at the right time. The universe perfectly aligned, destiny and free will overlapping into a perfect symmetry as I walk to the front doors of the Best Buy's automatic sliding doors. In exactly 4 minutes, I will step in front of these doors, and as if controlled by fate, they will gently slide open, and they will invite me in. I loved movies all my life growing up in Chattanooga, Tennessee, but by no means was I a cinephile. Look, I didn't even know who Martin Scorsese or Stanley Kubrick was. But I loved movies that everyone else loved. Star Wars, Back to the Future, Indiana Jones. But at 17 years old in 1999, there are 3 movies that radicalized me. American Beauty, Fight Club, and Cruel Intentions. In 2001, I moved to Knoxville. New city, no friends. So I decided to dive into movies as voraciously as a starving man at Thanksgiving. Partially because I loved the movies, and partially as a survival mechanism to stave off the loneliness of a new city and no friends. Movies for Sale was a store that had a couple locations in the area in those days. It was sort of like McKay's, but dealt exclusively in VHS and DVDs. VHS tapes for $5 each, or 5 for $20. I had a system where I would buy 5 movies for $20, keep the ones that I liked, and trade the others to McKay's for credit to buy their VHS tapes. This system worked particularly well for the higher-priced VHSs from McKay's that were harder to come by at the Movies for Sale. $8.99 for Taxi Driver, 2001, The Bridge on the River Kwai, Blue Velvet, that sort of thing. Using this method, I learned who Scorsese and Kubrick were. Along with David Lynch, Spielberg, Soderbergh, Fincher, Tarantino, it was a film school for $20 and 5 VHS tapes at a time. One of the $8.99 tapes at McKay's was Edward Scissorhands. I was aware of Tim Burton because I saw Sleepy Hollow in theaters a couple years previously. I thought it was neat that he made Pee-wee's Big Adventure and 2 of my favorite Batman movies, but I somehow just missed Edward Scissorhands. So after trading in Dangerous Minds, Suicide Kings, and a little-seen Steve Martin movie called Spanish Prisoner, I had enough credit to bring the Johnny Depp Tim Burton fantasy home. I love the colorful contrast of the small-town America with the huge Gothic castle on the hill, which housed the sweet and vulnerable Edward and his unfinished hands. I saw how different this movie was from The Matrix or Sex, Lies, and Videotape, and began to realize that there were different filmmakers behind these decisions. Different styles and sensibilities. I love the Wachowskis and Steven Soderbergh. I also love Tim Burton, especially the one starring Johnny Depp. One day I'm digging through the VHS bins at Movies for Sale and I find a strange black and white VHS box. It has a barely recognizable Johnny Depp and boasts from the director of Edward Scissorhands. It's called Ed Wood. I'd never heard of it. Why had I never heard of this? In 2025, I realize there's a lot of things that I don't know and even more things I still don't know. But at the time, I was beyond intrigued. I had to see this immediately. So I added it to my stack of 4 other films, paid my $20, and headed to my apartment. Putting this tape in the player and pressing play transported me to the world of low-budget horror films of the 1950s. The film is a stylized biographical comedy about Edward D. Wood Jr., an eccentric and wildly optimistic filmmaker from the 1950s Hollywood, who's often considered the worst director of all time. Despite his lack of talent and a shoestring budget, Ed is driven by a deep passion for making movies. The story follows his friendships, especially with aging horror legend Bela Lugosi, his unorthodox creative process, and the making of cult films like Plan 9 from Outer Space. Shot in black and white, the film celebrates Ed's outsider spirit while also highlighting the bittersweet reality of creative failure and unwavering ambition. After the first viewing, and it usually takes me a couple viewings to really get something, I knew this was my favorite Tim Burton movie. Tim Burton was one of my favorite filmmakers. Does that mean that Ed Wood is one of my favorite movies? Did I like it more than The Matrix or Sex, Lies, and Videotape? What about American Beauty, Boogie Nights, or Taxi Driver? I'm not sure I liked it more than those movies, but I liked it just as much as those movies, and to this day, Ed Wood is my favorite Tim Burton movie, and this includes anything he's made in the past 20 years since I first saw this film. Once I discovered my favorite movies, it became a goal to replace the VHS tapes with DVDs. DVDs are expensive, but if you aren't looking to upgrade your favorite movies from time to time, are you even a collector? Anyway, back to February 4th, 2004, outside of Best Buy. I see a worker with a key unlocking some mechanism on the sliding glass doors as the clock on my flip phone reads 10 a.m. I step in front of the door and the doors open up and guide me in. I walk to the new releases because this is the day that Ed Wood finally arrives on DVD. Released by Buena Vista, which is a subsidiary of Disney, there is a poetry to it being released on DVD 1 decade after its theatrical release in 1994. I ponder this as I pass the refrigerators and box televisions. This Love by Maroon 5 is playing through the store, and I can't decide if I love it or hate it. Who am I kidding? I love it. This is the greatest day in recent memory is all I can think as I reach the DVD new release section. At this point, my eyes scan titles like a pro. Months of scanning VHS tapes strewn about in bins at the movies for sale have trained me for this moment. Apparently, DVDs aren't in alphabetical order on the new release rack. They don't seem to be in popularity order either. American Splendor, The Fighting Temptations, My Boss's Daughter, Secondhand Lions, Lost in Translation, Under the Tuscan Sun, Scary Movie 3, the stuff from the previous week, 13, House of the Dead, Le Divorce, Radio. Perhaps Ed Wood has its own end cap on the aisle with a big graphic of Johnny Depp with a mustache wearing a fluffy Angora sweater. I'm pacing and scanning the entire store now. A Best Buy employee must have seen my twitching eyes and sweat running from my forehead, so he stopped me and he asked, "Is there something I can help you find?" I try to slow my breathing and calmly reply, "There's a movie called Ed Wood that's supposed to be released today. I don't see it on the new release rack." He sensed my panic and calmly replied, "They updated the display rack last night. If it's not there, we don't have it." Then he took a slight step back, and I could see that his stance became defensive. What's he think I'm going to do? Tackle him into the car radios and beat him across the face with an overpriced camcorder? Well, obviously the thought did cross my mind, but if I go to jail now, there's no Ed Wood DVD for me today. And thoughts aren't actions. I wasn't going to hurt him because he told me disappointing news. I may think it, but that would go against all of my pacifist philosophies as a 22-year-old hippie-ass goth kid. I politely smiled and said, "Thank you," and walked away, strategizing where to go next. Circuit City was close to Westtown Mall. That would be my next stop. I'm having flashbacks of working in the warehouse of Circuit City in Chattanooga as I enter the West Knoxville location. It's set up different in this city, but my eyes are scanning now. And as I've said before, my eyes have been getting a lot of practice lately. I bolt to the DVD rack. Am I in the Twilight Zone or something? I'm seeing the same new releases as Best Buy, just slightly more expensive. What's going on? Am I being punked? Is Ashton Kutcher in a trucker hat gonna pop out, hysterically laughing, acting like he's my best buddy to avoid being punched in the face like he does every week on MTV? Before the panic sets in, I begin to remember that I was late in learning about the movie Ed Wood. Maybe it isn't as mainstream as I'm assuming. The average Best Buy or Circuit City customer doesn't care about a black and white movie from 1994. I gotta go where the clientele is cultured, well-read, and into weirder stuff. I know. I'm going to Borders Books. It's right down the street. Their stuff is way overpriced, but they're pretty much the only game in town who has Criterion Collection DVDs. If Ed Wood is for the coffee-drinking MacBook Pro crowd, Borders is the perfect spot for it. I hadn't been in Borders for a while. Very little reason to go there other than to buy highly expensive Criterion Collection DVDs that I convince myself that I can't live without based on the printout I actually studied from the Criterion Collection website. Yes, there was a time where I had a 5-page printout of every DVD Criterion released so I could memorize the title, director, and number. After finding a copy of Jean-Luc Godard's 1960 international sensation Breathless at the Disc Exchange on Chapman Highway, I decided that Godard was my guy. I love that he used jump cuts for aesthetic reasons. It felt so avant-garde yet accessible to people even outside of the coffee-drinking MacBook Pro users, like myself. On my Criterion Collection print-off, the title Alphaville by Jean-Luc Godard from 1965, spine number 25, really captured my imagination. I did some research and discovered it was a sci-fi movie with no special effects, shot in Paris to be a futuristic city where everything was controlled by a sentient supercomputer called Alpha 60. Alphaville was a must-own DVD, so I went to Borders and purchased the Criterion DVD for $29.99, which is basically $1 million in 2025 money. Anyway, I took it home and watched it. It didn't blow me away, but I just spent $1 million of 2025 money on this thing, so I watched it again and again, and then eventually something clicked, and it overtook Band of Outsiders, Contempt, and Breathless to become my favorite film by the French New Wave director Jean-Luc Godard. Now I'm back at Borders because these fancy pants folks will have the fancy Ed Wood DVD, unlike the populous technology stores I just left. Borders doesn't give a crap about camcorders and car stereos. They care about culture and documentation of the great films, forever sealed to a shiny disc and sold to the highest bidder. Today, that bidder is me. I think to myself as I pass the sci-fi fantasy novels, bypassing the magazine wall and landing smack dab in the center of a mountain range of DVDs covered in plastic security cases, so the ruffians from Circuit City can't sneak them out under their black Creed sweatshirts. My Terminator-esque eyes scan and computing faster than ChatGPT on a meth bender as I search through the new releases for the coveted Ed Wood DVD. Then I go to the E section, because I'm in God's country now. These book nerds do things alphabetically. That's weird. I'm not seeing it. Maybe it's in the W section for Wood. These nerds always alphabetize by the author's last name. Clearly it's a habit any time a name is listed, even on a DVD title apparently. WTF, man. I'm not seeing it. I scan the store and I immediately spot an employee behind a desk with a computer. I explain to the Borders lady the situation, and like a genius, she says she will check their inventory from the computer. I see her computer screen reflected in her glasses. Her eyes move in scans that are familiar to me. She's a couple years older than me, but I can tell that we have the same spirit. In another life, we could have been siblings, perhaps lovers. Though I'm not sure there's any way she could have broken my heart any more hurtfully than she did in this life. As she told me, we don't have it in stock. It's not in our system. I explain that it is supposed to be released today. She looks at me like I'm an amateur. I know. I see that it was scheduled to be released today. I also see that we had it in stock just a few days ago, but it has been recalled. Recalled? What? Why? The system doesn't give a reason. It just says recalled. I ask, does this happen regularly? Have you seen things like this be recalled before? She says, it's pretty rare, but it does happen. Oof. I thank her for her help and walk back to the Geo Metro in the parking lot. I temporarily forget that my knees are basically at my chest as I sit in this tiny clown car. Ugh. I decide that I need to go home, get on my computer and research, figure out what this recall business is about. I'm about 15 minutes from home, so I drive and think about the word recall. Recall. Total recall. When I was in the 5th grade, a classmate told me about how his parents let him watch this movie called Total Recall, and there was an alien lady in the movie with 3 boobs. Recall. Recall. To call again. I probably need to call my folks and tell them how much I love them. Recall. 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 To remember. Remember what? It's hard to think about the past when my mission in the present isn't complete. I park in the lot of the apartment complex and rush inside. I fire up my HP desktop and start navigating the pre-social media, pre-YouTube Wild West of the internet. I find a DVD forum that explains that the DVD has been recalled. Speculation is that the disc is postponed because the box art doesn't read Academy Award-nominated actor Johnny Depp on the cover to reflect the recent Oscar nod for Pirates of the Caribbean, Curse of the Black Pearl. Buena Vista. The video distribution section of Disney pulled the disc to have them reprinted. My heart sinks. But I'm throwing a lifeboat a few comments down in the forum. According to this user, some copies of Ed Wood have slipped through the recall. He himself said he saw a copy at the local Blockbuster in Arizona. If mistakes have been made during this recall, I'm going to be the one who exploits it. I hop back in the Geo Metro and floor it to the nearest Blockbuster. There's so many Blockbusters. I know of 3 just in my area in Knoxville. A recall of this scale is bound to have misses. Managers who didn't get the memo. Avenging video store employees who refuse to take part in this nationwide exercise in censorship, who will lead you to the back door and slip you the illegal goods in an old popcorn bag. Good people fighting the good fight. An internal struggle against the powers that be. reflected in a proxy war between film lovers and the film distribution sector of Disney Corporation. Blockbuster Video is my battlefield, and with the right allies, I can win this war. With the right set of eyes, one can find deals on used VHS tapes and DVDs at Blockbuster. I bypass the million copies of Finding Nemo still on the shelves and make my way to the used bins, where overpriced new copies of movies are close by. Blockbuster was part of my Saturday routines while movie hunting over the previous couple years, but I don't have time for all that today. This time I'm looking for the new DVDs for sale. I'm looking for an illegal item. I'm looking for the black market under a blue sign. At this point, I'd even settle for a rental of Ed Wood and just keep it and pay full price. I'm getting desperate. My obsession is clouding my judgment. I'm not sure how much more I can take. Blockbuster 1 was a letdown, so I zip over to the Blockbuster number 2. Again, no dice. Finally, I drove to Blockbuster number 3. If they don't have this movie here, I'm going to personally curse all Blockbusters and hope they have an amazing business opportunity with a new upstart called Netflix, where they could purchase it for pennies, but they're too stupid to buy it and get put out of business as a result. I repeat, they better have this Ed Wood DVD. I will personally give Blockbuster the Netflix curse. I don't want to do it, but I will. Given the foresight of living in 2025, dear listener, you probably guessed that I had to curse Blockbuster, and they didn't have the Ed Wood DVD. But not all hope is lost. In the Bearden area of Kingston Pike, there is one more video store. It's called Hollywood Video. Similar in nature to Blockbuster, but they didn't have the clout to ever get a Netflix offer. Slightly less embarrassing for them in the future, but today they are a slightly less corporate, rental chain store. Surely their employees are either film-saving heroes or incompetent enough to let the Ed Wood DVD slip through the cracks and into my shaky, clammy hands. As I drive, I turn on the radio to a talk show where they're discussing the infamous Janet Jackson wardrobe malfunction at the Super Bowl from 2 days ago. I wonder why no one is stating the obvious. It's clear from anyone who has eyes and a brain that the stunt between Justin Timberlake and Janet Jackson was staged. The only question is if it was staged by the performers or masterminded by higher-ups at the network or the music industry, and why. Bigger ratings or album sales? Media attention? Well, they're certainly getting that. All the talk is this ripping of Janet Jackson's top. It's replayed constantly. It reminds me of the post-9/11 days. I guess we are used to seeing tragedy repeated 24 hours a day at this point, and trying to convince ourselves that it is something other than what it is. Hollywood Video has red in their logo and branding art to contrast from Blockbuster's bold blue. Inside is very similar to Blockbuster, just dimmer, like darker, less light. Or perhaps that's just my hope fading, and the world looks a little darker than it did just 24 hours ago. Spoiler alert, they don't have the Ed Wood DVD. I return home, I sit quietly. The frontal cortex in my brain isn't fully developed yet, but somehow I know breaking down in tears on my couch isn't going to solve anything. I start thinking about addicts and why they use drugs. Of course there's a physical addiction, but I suspect that their desire starts in the brain. And the disappointment of not being able to score leads to rationalizing anything just to get a hit. I'm feeling similar. What would I do for that Ed Wood DVD right now? I wouldn't rob someone. I certainly wouldn't kill. Would I send feet pics if asked? Probably. Would I trade 5 of my favorite movies on DVD for 1 copy of Ed Wood on DVD? I'm thinking yes. 10 movies? I decide to check out eBay. I've never used this site before, but I'm aware of its existence. I fire up the HP desktop, search Ed Wood DVD, and scream so loud every one of my neighbors probably thought I'd just been shot. There it was. The box art was glorious. A true thing of beauty. Something that only existed in my imagination was manifesting on the screen in front of me. To this day, I'm not sure if I screamed out of excitement in seeing the DVD for the first time, or because I read the price tag. $150, which is like $10 million in 2025 money. That's half the money I make in a week. Could I starve myself? Donate plasma? Who wants feet pics? I scroll down further and see that there are other listings. I see one, and this one is for $60. I press buttons, and I buy it. With shipping and tax, it's like $75, which is $5 million in 2025 money. Buyer's remorse creeps in and tells me I could have gotten 18 VHS tapes from Movies for Sale for that price. But I could tell that feeling to go away. Stop it, brain. You don't know what I went through today. I dare say that I may be the only human being in existence who cared this much about a DVD release of Ed Wood today. I'm not saying I deserve it. I don't deserve anything, but show me another human who cares as much as I do, and I'll buy them a copy off eBay too. 2 weeks later, my copy of Ed Wood on DVD arrived. It was perfect. It had great special features. I watched this DVD so much, and I would tell every guest in my apartment about its rarity. How I'm one of maybe a few hundred people in the world who has a copy of this. It was so special to me, and it still is. The DVD was eventually officially released in October of 2024, a full 8 months later. The only difference between the recalled version and the official release is the color of the spine on the box. The content of the disc is exactly the same. To this day in 2025, $75 is the most money I've ever spent on any physical media. VHS, DVD, Blu-ray, vinyl, never before and never since. Look, the story of the Ed Wood DVD release is largely lost in time. Why would anyone know or care about an obscure DVD from 20-something years ago? It didn't change anything. It didn't mean anything. And to most people, that is true. But it means something to me. Not every story or every memory is life-changing. It's a reminder to myself that I am alive and I have lived. I feel that way every time I think about the box art of Ed Wood on DVD. Briefs.